So I have a very special guest today on the podcast. It is the Abby Sandel from Appellation Mountain. Hi, Abby. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I'm so tickled to have you on the podcast and to just ask you questions that I wanted to ask you for 30,000 years. So when I was first starting out, like before I had even like become a part of the name community, when I was still like in the shadows, and I would go online and look at resources, you were one of the resources. So like if there is a Mount Rushmore of the name community, your face is on it.
That's really kind of you to say. Thank you.
So, I mean, you've just always been a resource for everyone. I can't imagine you not being here. So my question to you is, how did you get your start? Because I would imagine it was a dark, lonely, vacant place. It's not the name community, I'm sure then, is not the name community now. So how did you get your start, and was that nerve-wracking for you, or did you just dive in?
No, actually, in fact, I think it's so much braver to dive in now, because back then, as far as I knew, nobody was listening. Like, it was super easy to just start talking. Right. What had actually happened is I had worked for a university research center. And my boss had said to me, this was a couple of years before, we need something really cool for this research project. I've heard about these things called blogs. Can you start a blog for this project? And I'd never heard of a blog, but we had an IT department and they had one guy who showed me what it was and how to set it up and how to make it work. And so I'd had this like toe in the water before. And then a couple of years later, when I was sort of bored, I was like, well, I love names. And I've been interacting on message boards. Back then, I think it was mostly still Yahoo.
Yeah,
and I thought, why don't I just make my own blog? I sort of know how to do it. And tried it on a whim. No pressure, no stakes. It was great.
And so have you just always loved name for years, or did you find it becoming interesting? Was this like when you were naming your own babies, or like what prompted this? Hey, I love names.
Right. So I actually really dislike my given name, which is not Abby. And it's a little confusing because my given name is Amy. And I was born in 1973. It was the third most popular name given to girls, but of course there was no data, no resources back then. My mom has a really unusual family name, and we had a really unusual last name. So all she knew was she wanted her kids to have short, perky, American first names, and of course we all dislike them. So that's where it started. I was an early reader, and I read, baby name books at the library back when it was sort of weird to see a 9-year-old sitting in the baby name book section. But yeah, that's where it came from.
I actually had that question for you on my notes because I was going to say, I bet everybody doesn't know that she changed her own name. So yeah. I think that's really fun that you started into the name community because of your own personal name journey. Like that is, that's just amazing. And as an Alex, I love your kids' names, and I think that you have single-handedly made Cleo a global sensation. I remember reading, I think it was an article on Nameberry where you were talking about your kids' names, and this was so many years ago. And I remember seeing Cleo, spelled C-L-I-O, and I was like, the TikTok meme, butterfly in the sky. I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
You probably have 10 books worth of mental notes from all of the years of doing name consulting and just being in the name world in general. What are some essential things for success in naming that you would say, like, oh, these are the things that are the key to success?
I always say use the name you love, but that's easy, right? Like the question is, how do you know which name you love? I think one of the pieces that gets us tripped up is that we start by turning to our partner and saying, I like these 3 names, and your partner responds, right? You immediately go into this back and forth about names almost as objects, right? It's like you're standing in a store holding up, what about this lamp? What about that lamp? And I think it's really great, if you can, to take a step back and examine your own feelings about your name. Did you like it? What did you like about it? Did you dislike it as a child? Maybe it was a really unusual family name, but you grew into it. Or maybe you came to appreciate it over time. Or maybe you've always just been kind of like meh about your name. Examine those feelings, and then talk to your partner about their experience with their name and what matters for you. Sort of by definition, we almost always have our children when we're new in our relationships and new at being part of a bigger family with, in-laws on both sides. And so kind of talking about your values and what matters to you is a better place to start than saying, oh, hey, do you like Liam or do you like Noah better?
I'm sure you've seen this a million times, because I've seen this a million times, where couples just can't agree and there's just this impasse. What are ways that you have found helpful to navigate the straddling that major gap of finding a resolve? Is there a resolve?
Yeah, no, as you know, it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is valuable is for the couple to try to put some objective numbers around a name. And I've got just a couple of spreadsheets. I've borrowed some of these from Nancy's Baby Names and from some other non-name resources, where you can kind of go in and make a spreadsheet and say, it's really important to us that the name have these 3 qualities, and this is how we think the names rate. I've also recently been asking couples, is this more important to you, right? Like, if it's really important that you use a particular family name, to think about that as, a 10, it is your top priority. Well, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to negotiate in exchange for using that really important family name? So sometimes if you can put some objective measures on it, it doesn't get you to an answer, but it gets you to a place where you can talk to each other about the decision. And I should say my graduate work is in public policy, which sounds really far removed from names, but it actually turns out the negotiating of a name agreement is weirdly like policy making. So I feel more comfortable in that space. I think because of that. But anyway, yeah, it's never easy, right? You know that.
Yeah.
But trying to take it into like scoring and numbers and ranking and rating, sometimes it just at least gets you talking again.
Yes. Oh, it's so good.
And I don't know if you feel this way, but I've also come to feel over the years that the person who cares more should get more of the vote.
Yes.
It just, and I would say that about, I don't know what your numbers look like, but kind of year over year, about a quarter of the families that I talk with, their baby is already here. And yeah, right. And so at that point, I find often, this is, I don't want to stereotype, but it's often dads who have been resistant to the mom's favorite name are sort of at this point saying, okay, you know what, really, it was a mistake for me to say no to that name. If that's what works, that's really what we need to do. So
yeah, it's almost like the turmoil, seeing her going through turmoil shows him, oh, she was really serious about this. Since 2020, every single consult that I've done is about name regret.
Really?
No one's asked me for lists or anything. Like, it's every single one is about name regret, which is stunning to me. Like, insane.
But it makes sense.
I feel like the pandemic was so unsettling.
Yeah.
that it's just like tipped everybody a little bit over the edge, and now we're like contemplating what is life and what is the meaning of life and what is serious to me, and bringing back names that have, I think, a lot of personal meaning again. I feel like I've seen that shift of where names went from sounding more trendy or sounding more Hollywood to being more grounded in meaning, even though that looks different than it did 50 years ago. I feel like I've seen people have personal meaning be so much more important, especially on the heels of name regret. Has that been your experience at all, or what has your experience been like?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say, if I were dealing with name regret, I would want to talk to you, because you do such a beautiful job of just embracing the emotional side of the decision. But yes, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. You are right. There is, I do think, and I'm sure you've seen this too, there is still this pull to want something, something pretty, something attractive, something that other people are going to look at and say, ooh. But at the same time, there's this, I think, really healthy impulse to focus on what is meaningful for us. And that's, I think, what's driving diversity in naming more than anything. I'm not dismissive of it at all. I think it's great that people are saying, we want a name that resonates for our family. And I agree completely.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you, because, and I know that you've seen this, I'm sure, over and over and over again, because I know that, like, I was guilty of doing this myself. When people come into this space, they hear the tropes. There's a handful of nameisms that get held onto, and I think it takes time to outgrow that and see that the world is so much bigger than these name rules. And so I don't see some of these things as much anymore, but like when I was first coming up, a big thing I heard all the time was, you can't name kids juniors because they're their own person. They shouldn't be thirds or fourths. They shouldn't be super strong, weird, clunky family names. You shouldn't be using nicknames. And as time has gone on, like, I was on that bandwagon, and then as time has gone on, I've been like, I would love my grandmother's name, even if it is old and clunky, because then I'm carrying her with me, and I'm my own person. But it's like, the names are like jewelry, not like this burden. They're almost like this jewelry that you want to wear around with you. What are your thoughts on that, on juniors and nickname names? Some of these things that people think that they have to stay away from.
Yeah, you're so right. It's so funny to me when I get a phone call and someone says, I know I can't do this because, and it's exactly what you're talking about. I think that some of those rules have a kernel of something good in them, right? Like, we should not face pressure to name our firstborn son after his father or grandfather automatically. Though my firstborn son is named after his dad's father. So, but it shouldn't be a default, right? So it's good to examine that and to take the pressure off the table. But ultimately, if we are guided by what we feel is the right choice for our family, there are no rules. Wait, let me back up. I don't think you should name your baby Lucifer. That is a hill I will die on. There probably are a few other things that I would say, ooh, that's a bad idea. But in general, if you and your partner are on board, I think any name can work and can be a wonderful choice. Nearly any name can work and be a wonderful choice.
Yeah, I think you said something that made me think of a conversation I'd had with Taylor from What's in a Baby Name. I was like, what is the line? If you're just saying, here are all these rules, throw them all out, what should the standard be? Like, there has to be something that governs you. And the closest thing that I've come to is, are you naming with dignity? Because you probably shouldn't be naming your child Biscuit, even if it has this long family story, because Like, would you want to have that name Biscuit? Would you want to be in a relationship with somebody named Biscuit? And is that honoring this person? Is it giving them dignity to wear this name? Do you have a better way of articulating that, or having a standard of, if you're chucking out all the rules and you follow the name you love, what's the thing that keeps you in check and double checking your decision?
Well, that's beautiful. I love the way you said that. I think there are two things. The first one is to remember that we name strangers. I am always captivated by these conversations where a parent wants to choose something really bold because it's the kind of name that they would have wanted for their child. And, I have to tell them, look, I hear that, but I am the least athletic person on earth, and I raised a varsity athlete. I have no musical ability, and I raised a drummer. Your children will shock you, right? Like, they are not going to be mini yous. So, it really is about recognizing that you don't know how their life is going to go. But the second thing that I think is really important is build in some balance. I wouldn't want to be named Biscuit, but if it's a really important family name with a great story, maybe it's Elizabeth Biscuit.
Yes. Yeah. Putting it in that special middle name spot. That middle name covers a multitude of sins.
Yes. Yes. But also, if you're going to name your kid Maverick, which is a very mainstream name now, but when I first started hearing it, I thought, oh, that's a lot to live up to. I would have said, be Maverick James. Don't be, Maverick Danger. Like, give the name some balance.
Options.
Yeah, options are good.
Yeah. When I first discovered you through Claire, through her name scoop, Claire is just the best. I just love her so much. And I saw your Sunday summary, and I was like, what is this magic? Which led me to, I think, your Facebook at the time. Would you have had a Facebook?
Probably.
Yeah, 10 years ago. And I just loved that idea of you summarizing the name news of the week. I just thought that was so epic. Just how have you seen, like, if you were to summarize the names of the last 10 years or the last 20 years, like, what have you seen shift? What are things you're glad are gone? What are things that you're looking forward to with that?
Oh, that is such a big question. Let me think.
I'm sorry to throw that at you.
It's the 10 to 20 year horizon about what has changed. That's hard, right? One of the things that always leaps out to me and worries me just a little is that I worry that we want more control over our children's future identities when we choose their names. And that sounds dark, but it's not really. It's not born of wanting to destine them to a specific path. It's more like we're worried, right? Like, we are nervous about their futures. Yeah. So we want to give them every advantage. And I think it's come out in different ways, that we want them to have a name that can be distinctive, so they'll stand out in the crowd, because we do feel like life is competitive. For some parents, that means we want to avoid nicknames because we want to make sure that our child is only called what we want our child to be called. But for other parents, especially for our daughters, we can end up worrying that if we choose a name that's too feminine, that it will be perceived as weak. So I think it's more about how much anxiety we bring to parenting in the 2020s than maybe about the names themselves, if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm sort of dodging your question, but I do think that's what is driving us. And my kids are in their teens now, but certainly I felt anxious as a new mother. I think everybody does, but I think the broader cultural anxiety about parenting has really, it feels much more intense today than it did then.
Yeah. But like even just in the name, just like basic names, like names that have trended 10, 20 years ago to now. I mean, names are fashion, they're trends, right? And you can see the shift going from the super trendy, and there's nothing wrong with these names. I think that these names are awesome, but it was a certain look and a certain style that was, I would say, around about 10 years. That's now, I think we're on the other side of that and we're heading into like this new trend. What are some names that surprisingly stuck out to you that you think about, and names that you think are going to be big in the next trend?
The one thing that is fascinating to me are Laura Wattenberg has called them liquid names. The names, the Laylas, the Mias, the Liams, the very flowing liquid names that have dominated how we name our children for really 2 decades now. I feel like I'm starting to hear just the first little bit of pushback to liquid names. And I'm waiting. Like, I have my eye on names like Trudy, right?
Yes! I love Trudy so much. What a
great
gem!
Name. Yeah, great names, lots of history, but just a little more grind and gnash and clunk in all those consonants. And when I talk to younger people who are not, I mean, frankly, my kids and their friends, they're all of a sudden talking about names that are like really not like the Laylas and Milas that we have known for the past couple of generations. So I think that's coming. We might have to wait another, 5-10 years before we even see the beginnings of that in the data. But the younger the parent I talk to, the more likely they are to come up with names that I'm just like, whoa. The other thing that I think that is fun is I think we're actually starting to see right now are different nicknames for classic names. So I'm running into more little William, who instead of Will, they're like, well, we're going to call him Billy.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Oh, that's just awesome. Making my heart sing. Those are my favorite names.
Yeah. And like just those old school, sort of 1950s era nicknames. And it sort of makes sense, right? Like Will is now, I don't know. I know lots of Wills, in their 40s. So it's been around for a while. So I think that's happening. I'm curious to see if that will happen with other names. Like, will we finally get Elizabeth's called Betty again?
Yes.
Definitely watching that. And then I think we're in the golden age of word names, right? Like River and Willow are as mainstream as you can get. I mean, if a kid had been named River or Willow in my 3rd grade class, it would have been headline news in our neighborhood, right? Like, no way.
Yeah.
And now I don't even blink. So I do think it's interesting to see that wave of word names. Parents are not going to stop thinking about more nature names, more virtue names, more meaningful choices. And I don't think they should. I think it's a great way to find a distinctive name.
I remember hearing the name Margaret, and somebody wanted to use the nickname Rhett. And I can't stop thinking about that. Like, I love that so much. It's such a fresh way to spin a classic name, especially if you're honoring somebody and that person went by Maggie. It was like, this is our Margaret, but we're calling her Etta as a distinction. I just think that's so beautiful. I just love names so much. And I think that's why I've always been so drawn to what you're doing, because you're always so excited about names. And something that you've said over and over again is every name has a story. And it's just, reading your articles make me giddy because there's so much joy about names. You celebrate names so much, but you also carry this grounding rod with you of like, names are awesome, but there's real life too. You do such a good job of leveling those two out.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that.
Well, let me say, in the beginning, when I first started writing, I thought I had to be snarky, which does not come naturally to me at all, right? Or most people, I think. But I had a friend that I knew in real life, one of the few people that I knew that knew that I wrote this blog, and she looked up her second son's name on my site, and I said something mean about it, and I felt so awful, and that has stayed with me for years and years and years and years. That moment when you've written something kind of offhanded because you thought the internet would like it, and then the people you care about are hurt. So it's always been real for me, and I think for anybody eventually, like, you have that light bulb moment, but mine came early, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that's the thing that puzzles me. Is I know people are people, and I understand human nature, but of all of the things to be super opinionated about, I feel like baby names should be at the very bottom of that list. And yet, there was just a time that I had to step away from message boards because it gave me so much rage. To just see people tearing down other people, because I don't know if the people on there realize that the people that they're slaying come crying to people like us. And I remember one time a woman came into my DMs and she said, my sister trashed me on a public message board. And I was like, your sister? I said, first of all, you need a new sister. Because that crosses so many boundaries in and of itself. But if your sister was genuinely worried and genuinely cared, that would have been a meaningful, deep conversation between the two of you. She wouldn't have gone and trashed you online. And I think that it saddens me because sitting across from so many people with name regret and seeing where it comes from, that opinions have power. And I'm not saying to never have a negative opinion or a concerned opinion, but to see so many people with this vitriol about baby names, I just find so puzzling. And then I think on the other side of that is that as moms, we have about 1 million opportunities to practice standing up for ourselves and for our kids. And I think that choosing a baby name is a good practice first step of saying, hey, back off. I'm a good person and a smart person, and this is the name that I've chosen for my baby, right?
Yeah, no, that's really well said. It is fascinating to me how other people will use the line, poor kid, they're going to be bullied, right?
Yes, that's one of the tropes that I've heard all the time, and it's so much more complicated than just names.
Plus, are we supposed to let other kids bully each other? That's what baffles me.
Yes,
Really
exactly.
Unpack it. You know, I had a really weird last name growing up. It's one of one, right? It's like a change, one of those names that got changed through immigration and probably made worse. But was it okay to make fun of it, right? Like that's a no. And we would all answer that about last names. So why do we think it's okay with first names? It's bizarre to me. Like the bullying is the problem, not the name.
Because name regret is so big, it's like, I think, the trending topic right now. What would be your advice on navigating name regret? Like, can you answer that question in two parts? Can you give an answer to parents and then an answer to the name community and how you think the name community should be handling that as well?
Ooh, good question. Well, for parents, almost always, I want to tell them they didn't make a mistake, right? Because what sounds like a name that they're regretting, like that their feelings are legitimate, but that very rarely do I encounter a name where I say, like, yeah, this is a problem? Like, often the name that they've chosen is really just fine to the wider world. So it's to kind of try to help parents get over that feeling that they've made a mistake that the rest of the world is judging them for, and to focus on whether this is something that they need to change themselves for their own peace of mind, for their own family. I mean, very occasionally the situation is more complex, but most of the time it really is just about recognizing that the choice you've made is going to be fine. You don't have to do anything. It's, do you choose to do something? And then if you do, to kind of focus in on, and it's so hard, but to take the spotlight off this fear of what our decision could be like in the future, and to refocus on what we were thinking about in the first place. Is it a concern with the spelling? Did we choose a more ordinary name because we thought the more interesting name that we liked would be a problem? Like, to really kind of reevaluate our decision, but calmly, without that harsh judgment on us. And, I also tell parents, even if you change the name and the choice you make is the right one, it will not be an instantly comfortable moment. I legally changed my name as an adult. I made a very considered, years-long decision with no pressure, no sleep deprivation, no everybody asking what's the baby's name. And even so, I felt a sense of loss over my original name, and that's normal. So if you experience name regret and you make the choice to change your child's name, you will probably feel better about the decision, but it will not resolve everything. So that's the hard part.
So true. You have to go, you're going to have in the process, you're going to be relieved and mourning at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, so well said. For the name community, name regret is real. Regret over all sorts of decisions is completely real. I do think, to the greatest extent possible, we have to give ourselves grace, and to say when someone's experiencing name regret, to express compassion, to support them, but to not necessarily send them back to the drawing board to begin all over again. One of the things that I tell parents, and this is so interesting to me, is that we name our children as infants. We're super involved with their name for the first 3, 4, 5 years of their life. But then they go out into the world and they make the name their own. And, kids come home from school with different nicknames. It sounds different when they say it. It sounds different when your next baby says their child's name. So the point that you are responsible for your child's name ends a lot sooner than you would think that it does. And often parents who've experienced regret do fall in love with their kids' names down the road as their child says the name and writes their name in crayon and goes through the world. I didn't love my son's name when we first chose it. I still don't like his middle name, but it's too late to change it. But I just looked at that as information. And after, once I kind of got over okay, we're not going to change his name, I did fall in love with it over time.
You said something that reminded me of something that I was thinking of earlier in the conversation, where you said the concerning thing about parents in this generation is they're wanting to control the name environment and the incubus for a lot longer. And something that, it's so funny because everybody I talk to thinks that they're the only person thinks they're alone, but they say the same exact thing that 1,000 other people have said to me. And they say, most of the time it's moms, and they say, I feel like my child is going to hate me, that when they're 15 years old and they discover what their name was, that's the name that they're going to want, and they're going to think I'm a terrible parent. And what I've started to say to them is, the name you choose really doesn't define whether you're a good parent or not. It's how you are going to choose to show up when that does happen. So if you give your child the most beautiful name on the planet, and at 15 they come home and say that they want to be known as Diatomaceous Earth, you didn't fail by giving them that specific name. I think you should say, oh, okay, and then you just walk with them through that and to give yourself the grace of you don't know the future. And being a good parent is how you show up in the future and how you're showing up right now.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. We have no way of knowing how it's going to turn out. And it's so humbling to have to acknowledge that. But you're absolutely right. We just have to show up for our kids. And, my mom, to her credit, has been she doesn't understand my name change, but she's been completely at peace with it. So, or she has always presented as if she's completely at peace with it. So, I adore my mom, even though I hated my name. So it is completely possible to have both things be true.
It's so funny because I've always known you as Abby, but I've known about your name change for a long time. I look at you and I'm like, you don't look like Amy at all.
Names are so similar. I will say, I think if I hadn't changed it, I think now I would be at peace with my first name, but I don't know. It's been a long time since I made the change. So
if people didn't know you before, they know you now and are in love with you as I am. Where can they find you on all your things?
Right. So, legacy of being an early blogger, I have an impossible to remember website name. It is AppellationMountain.net. If you took high school French, it comes from je m'appelle Abby. So it's APPELLATION mountain.net. And I'm at APPMTN on social media.
Awesome. Even on Facebook, you're facebook.com/appmountain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you have a Patreon.
Oh, yeah. On Patreon, I'm AM Baby Names, which is slightly easier to remember.
Thank you so much for this meaty conversation. It's so nice to talk names with somebody who's as in the tank as you. Because, besides the name community, there's just nobody else to talk to about Rhett as a nickname for Margaret.
No, I thank you. This was so much fun. It was a pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Isn't Abby absolutely amazing? I admire and respect her so much. Please check her out on Instagram and Facebook and her Patreon and her website, Appellation Mountain. Please like and subscribe. It helps get this name info out there to help the masses. And I'll talk